Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs. And tonight we are celebrating the film of John Singleton, actually this whole month. For those of you who don't know, which I'm sure everyone does know, John Singleton passed away unexpectedly, very suddenly in April of this year at the very young age of 51. And it's such an incredible loss for all of us. So we decided to celebrate his films by showing a few of them this summer, and we invited the incredibly brilliant Ernest Hardy, who's a writer and cultural critic, to curate a little film series for us. And he'll be out here in a moment to introduce the film. Ernest, you may know him from many sources, but partly because he co-curated a series here at the Hammer Museum called The Black Book, which he did with Tisa Bryant. I think over the years we've shown probably 15 films, and they've done many evenings of mixed collages of films as well. And someday I'm hoping that they'll decide to come back and do it again, but it's a lot of work to put those on. But in the meantime, I'm very happy that he agreed to curate this film series. Ernest Hardy's criticism has appeared in the New York Times, the Village Voice, Vibe, Rolling Stone, the LA Times, and the LA Weekly. He's a contributor to the reference books 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die and classic material, the Hip Hop Album Guide. His collection of criticism, Blood Beats Volume 1, Demos, Remixes, and Extended Versions, was a recipient of the 2007 Pen Beyond Margins Award. Blood Beats Volume 2, The Bootleg Joints, was published in February 2008. Ernest has been a juror for the Sundance Film Festival, the San Francisco International Film Festival, the Palm Springs International Short Film Festival, Los Angeles Outfest, and the Los Angeles Film Festival, and co-programmed the Fusion Film Festival here in Los Angeles. His essay, Arthur Jafa's Monstrous Cinema, appears in Jafa's monograph, A Series of Utterly Improbable Yet Extraordinary Renditions. He has profiled Jordan Peele, Barry Jenkins, and Ryan Coogler for Written By magazine, and wrote liner notes for Chuck D Presents Louder Than a Bomb, Curtis Mayfield Gospel, Chet Baker, Career 1952 to 1988, and the box sets Love Luther, Say It Loud, A Celebration of Black Music in America, and Superstars of 70s Soul, among others. He co-edited the literary anthology War Diaries, which was published in 2001. His short story, Cold and Wet, Tired You Bet, appeared in Best Gay Stories 2011, and two of his poems appeared in the anthology Black Gay Genius on Joseph Beam and In the Life in 2015. His forthcoming collection of short stories will be published by Writ Large Press, and he says his publisher is anxiously awaiting the long overdue manuscript. And I know that feeling, always on deadline. Ernest is currently teaching very lucky students in the Critical Studies Department at Cal Arts. And now please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you guys for coming out. I have to apologize. I'm just getting over a late summer cold, so I'm a little congested and raspy, which I know are not the best vocal tones. So I'm going to start now. We die. That may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. Toni Morrison. For those of us who love Black people, those of us who love Black culture, who treasure Black life, and do not think of either Black people or Black culture as just something to consume, as mere metaphor for something other than Blackness, today is an especially sad day. Waking up this morning to the news that Miss Toni Morrison had died was devastating. Yes, we knew she was in her late 80s. We knew that she had health issues over the last several years. But through her work, her groundbreaking, visionary, world-changing work, novels, essays, and interviews that we studied and learned from as much as we did anything she ever wrote down, we'd come to think of her as being timeless, enduring as her words, formidable, essential, immortal. This morning, Professor Christina Sharp tweeted, "The world should stop for a minute." I want us to take just a moment of silence, please, to pay respect and gratitude to Miss Morrison and all she showed us, taught us, and illuminated. So if we could take just a moment right now. Thank you. There were two other tweets that I'd like to read, two other tweets that went out this morning. The first is from the writer Caitlin Greenidge. She wrote, I also think how, materially, she lived a life that we are told Black women geniuses aren't allowed, a long life, appreciated and loved while alive, utterly free in her expression of self and in her art. And then the second and final tweet from Danny Darko. One behavior I dislike about deaths of public figures especially is it prompts everyone to say something profound, soaring, or reflective. And usually, all I have is grief and a banal sense of loss. I'm not going to try to conjoin Miss Morrison's death with tonight's event beyond paying the respect we just did. I will say, though, that the last few years, as we've lost one Black luminary after another, have been difficult. These men and women were not so much engaged in the task of proving our humanity or proving that we too are American or in that ignoble gaslighting practice of transcending race. They showed, even if only momentarily sometimes, how to transcend not race, but America itself, this sprawling, catastrophic experiment in evil that sustains itself by our blood and death. It's been difficult losing these men and women, and we're grateful for the gifts they shared with us while they lived. John Singleton was a hometown hero, born, raised, and educated, both formally and through informal channels and processes, in Los Angeles. So much of his work was a love letter to LA, to Black LA specifically. He was part of that movement of young Black filmmakers who were pushing the culture of hip-hop to include film. Filmmakers who were very much shaped by the energy, aesthetics, and politics of the culture, even as many of them, not all of them, had conventional film school educations in their creative arsenal. The first wave of hip-hop films included features like Wild Style from 1983, Beat Street and Breakin', both from 1984, and Crush Groove from 1985, as well as documentaries such as Star Wars from 1983. But roughly half a decade later, hip-hop films, like the music itself, took on a grittier texture to reflect the everyday socio-political concerns of everyday Black people. Police brutality, communities largely abandoned by the government when it came to infrastructure and any sort of positive attention, while also being violently policed, and the fallout from the introduction of crack into Black neighborhoods. You might say those early hip-hop films, though released during Ronald Reagan's first term as president of the U.S., were light escapist fare that captured something of the pre-Reagan zeitgeist, while the second wave captured the heightened tensions and concerns of increasingly disenfranchised Black people who were bearing the brunt of Ronald Reagan's racist ideology and policies. It was kind of mind-numbing a few days ago when the world seemed to be in shock that Ronald Reagan was a racist, based on some recordings that were released, and you just wonder, what does it take? I mean, obviously it takes people saying nigger on tape before you know it. Very early in Boyz n the Hood, we see John Singleton's response to Reagan. Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing from 1989 kicked off that second wave of hip-hop films. It was soon followed by Boyz n the Hood, 1991, Matty Rich's Straight Outta Brooklyn, also 1991, Ernest Dickerson's Juice, 1992, Poetic Justice, 1993, and F. Gary Gray's Friday, 1995, which, though a comedy, has an incredibly sobering undercurrent of social commentary beneath the laughter. And I would argue that the films Just Another Girl on the IRT, 1992, by Leslie Harris, and Darnell Martin's I Like It Like That, 1994, pushed that hip-hop or hip-hop-inflected cinema out of the realm of the phallocentric by having smart, complex women make films about smart, complex women who continue to be underrepresented. Dark-skinned African-American girls and women, and Afro-Latinas. And if you haven't seen either of those films, I would really recommend you check them out. Just Another Girl on the IRT and I Like It Like That. Inspired in part by the 1987 NWA track of the same name, Boyz n the Hood is a film that was clearly personal, that had the resonance and impact of a memoir whose first-person voice pulled no punches. But the film also laid out a story with implications and meaning beyond its creator and beyond its geographical setting. The film opens in South Central. This is before the current shift that is displacing and erasing black people, with it having been renamed South LA, so it will be more attractive to a certain demographic. The name South Central is embedded with history and meaning, and not all of it negative. But the act of renaming it is also embedded with history and meaning, none of it positive for black people. In the film, the speech that Furious Styles gives on gentrification was incredibly prescient when we now look at the area formerly known as South Central. And in a few weeks, when we screen Rosewood, we'll again see the ways in which land and home ownership have always been fraught undertakings for African Americans, with no guarantee of the security and generational wealth building that white Americans have been able to take for granted. In fact, simply owning land and homes often painted targets on our foreheads. It's crucial also in the film that when we see the cop duo responding to the burglary attempt at the Styles home, it's the black cop who has the shitty confrontational attitude. Black people across this country can testify to the accuracy of that, and to the fallacy of the belief that diversifying police forces means anything radical. On the filmmaking side of things, the casting in Boyz is a who's who of black Hollywood, and as his career progressed, Mr. Singleton did what so many black filmmakers have done for decades, which is to not only build his own in-house acting crew that he cast repeatedly, but also casting actors who may not have been acknowledged by white Hollywood or the mainstream, that is, white movie-going public, but who were well-known and beloved by black people. The best artists simultaneously define their genre and transcend it. Just like Aretha Franklin was the queen of soul and so much more than that, John Singleton was one of the architects of that second wave of hip-hop film and so much more than that. The films chosen for this retrospective are intended to show his wide-ranging interest and his maturation as a filmmaker, but they only scratch the surface of the films and TV projects he produced. One final note. Over the last few years, several studies have been produced showing that the health outcomes for wealthy black Americans, black people with means and access to the best health care, doesn't align with the health outcomes of wealthy white Americans. It's much more in alignment with poor black people. Part of that is a medical establishment deeply rooted in racism, and which gives black people shoddy treatment across the board. Think of Serena Williams, shortly after giving birth to her daughter, having to climb out of bed and all but beg for treatment for a pre-existing medical condition that imperiled her life after giving birth. But part of it is also the wear and tear on the minds and bodies of black people living under constant clouds of stress and tension that take a toll on you, whether you're rich or poor. In many ways, Mr. Singleton's death from a stroke at the age of 51 is as much a commentary on black life in America as many of his films were. We hope to see you next week for Poetic Justice and in the following weeks for Rosewood and Too Fast, Too Furious. And I'm going to leave you with one more quote from Miss Morrison. It's from her 2015 essay, No Place for Self-Pity, No Room for Fear. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art. Thank you for coming out. There isn't a post-screening conversation, but we hope to see you in the coming weeks. Thank you.